Hello and welcome back to the Rise and Fall of the Chill Out Room, a history of ambient house and ambient techno 1989 to 1996. Last time we looked at several labels including San Francisco's Silent Records, and this time we're heading over to the east coast of America. In New York, Instinct Ambient upped its stakes and planned a year's release in advance, all with matching artwork marketed as a collectible monthly series. This was a label dedicated to ambient in '95. In Europe, the first 8 volumes were licensed by KK Records. Instinct Ambient's monthly series began with Pharos by SETI. Dupree and his artists once again donned their science hats for 2 hours of cold space drift. After the first album's Signals, the 14 tracks here are named Beacons 1 to 14. Frank Drake, president of the SETI Institute in California, provides liner notes and a spoken essay on the subject in the first 18-minute track. Behind this speech is Synth Drone, very cold, very minimal, very 1995. As with the first SETI album, we get both long, sparse sections of near nothingness, a reflection of the space being searched, and the album does include recordings of pulsars captured through radio telescopes. There are also slowly evolving melodic passages and brief moments of clanging rhythms. For all the coldness, there is also warmth. Beacon 05 is a startlingly beautiful piece, maybe my favourite thing Taylor Dupree has ever created. But for the most part, this is slow, cold, minimalist, lengthy, and demands a lot of time and attention from the listener. Those who are willing to give it, however, will be rewarded by a journey through space that is far more science fact than science fiction. Instinct Ambient's first proper label compilation, the Chill Out sets being largely licensed material, Ambient Systems was the first in a series that actually charted the change in ambient tastes over the late 90s into the start of the 21st century. This first volume features a preview of many albums to come over the monthly series, as well as exclusives from most of the artists involved too. This does give it an oddly jumbled feel. It starts with 2 gorgeously atmospheric floaty ambient tracks sandwiching a very heavy going dub piece, and it works brilliantly as a sampler but less so as a single listening entity. There are great tracks here though. Deep Space Network's 11 Bars a real highlight, and Mysteries of Science's In Fevered Dreams is one of Dominic Woozy's best tracks. Omicron's debut was, while released on Instinct Ambient, very much on the IDM and experimental techno end of things. For his second record, The Generation and Motion of a Pulse, Sivas's artist throws in more drones, textures and generally ambient elements, but leaves the light off. In fact, this might be an even less welcoming album than his first. It takes 10 minutes for the album to reach a point beyond heavy synth drones, then the ensuing arpeggios quickly take a turn for the sinister. It's not until track 4, Static State, that we get beats, and it's an interesting surprise to find how glitchy they are. This is proto-clicks and cuts, turn of the century glitch music hiding under the ambient banner. Suddenly, Positron provides us with some much more conventional melodic and rhythmic territory, proper ambient techno-friendly material here. Mecha follows in similar suit. Metabolic Wave throws a curveball, however, and closes the album on the kind of sequencing that sounds like a chase scene from a modern sci-fi film, soundtracked by a synthwave artist. I've never been able to fully get my head around the generation and motion of a pulse. This artist's music has a strange, cold, alien nature to it that I often struggle with, but it's hard to deny that this is a deeply original and creative album though, which is always refreshing. Dietrich Sherman began his career collaborating with Taylor Dupree in Prototype 909, and the two would collaborate regularly throughout the 90s, several times in the monthly series. In Facil, he collaborates with Abe Duke, a one-off pairing. The two conduct 8 exercises in minimalism here, not in terms of arrangement, with some reasonably thick drum machine loops and layers of synths used, but in terms of structure. This is music of repetition and subtle change. The rhythms are intricate, some IDM influence clearly at play, but also tight and dry, no clangs or ringing hi-hats, with the kicks emphasising treble. In many ways it's a close cousin of minimal techno, and looks ahead to the hyper-minimal material a number of New York artists will be producing in the coming years. Dominic Woozy's 4th ambient record, and to date his last, this is The Erotic Nature of Automated Universes by Mysteries of Science. Quite a title, that. The first 2 tracks find Woozy in experimental mode, 17 minutes of pure minimalist repetition on Into the Mechanic Phylum, and 8 minutes of fairly harsh ambient acid on Guten Tag, Herr Stockhausen. In contrast, the second half of the album provides some classic Woozy ambient trance. Into the Technological Womb is one of his best, twinkly, modulating sequences with expressive, wistful improvisation over the top. It's dreamy, floaty ambience with an emotive bent and an excellent piece all round. Interfacing unleashes his darker side, sinister growling bass, stomping beats and acid squelch all marching forward like an unstoppable machine. It's a hell of a memorable way of ending one's final album. In 2020, Tim Humphries' Rediscovery Records launched with a compilation of 5 Mysteries of Science tracks, including Into the Technological Womb, 2 pieces from the debut album and a couple of compilation tracks. It's a brilliant set and has actually ended up being my favourite Mysteries of Science record. After a run of largely cold, more minimal releases, Instinct Ambient's monthly series spreads its wings and heads east, or at least Adam Shaikh does. With inspiration, field recordings and musical elements all coming from his explorations in India, Journey to the Sun is one of the finest examples of what gets called ethno-ambient. Shaikh's first album had featured these elements alongside trance music, but here he gets down to business from the opening moments. Maybe not being white himself helps, but there's no trace of novelty or cultural tourism here, the whole thing treating the source material with respect. Emergence is replete with rich, warming drones, while the title track drops back to near silence, allowing field recordings and snippets of distant music to do the talking. Infinite Emanation throws in gentle rhythms and more wistful melodies, while Zero G ends the album on a devastating note, leaving the listener contemplating their experiences. A masterful album. Terre Thaemlitz found ourselves very frustrated and at odds with the ambient scene and its seemingly apolitical attitude, other than perhaps a naive pseudo-spirituality. I understand that. Radical music has the power to convey radical ideas. It doesn't mean it necessarily is required to, but ambient was in the 90s only really regarded with itself. Indeed, generally the biggest developments that have occurred in and in response to ambient have tended to be about the production, perception and function of music rather than its place within society. When Thaemlitz tried to introduce some of her political and sexual ideas into the body of her work, Instinct were unimpressed. So whatever statements Soil is trying to make are veiled in secrecy, a staged photograph featuring a condom in the album's inner sleeve and the pink triangle on the back cover the only hint at what might be going on here. Not that too many seem to have noticed that. She may quietly mock Instinct's owners by describing their potential listeners as apolitical spiritual butterflies of an extremely delicate nature, but I strongly suspect that, at this time especially, few listeners and potential listeners cared too much about abstract meaning that was intended to make statements on society, gender and sexuality. Soil is an album of contrasts, and the beautiful meditative nature of the music is very clearly designed to clash with the content above it, be it a distant funfair or examples of domestic abuse. By putting these brasher sounds in a gentle ambient setting, they can be jarring or unsettlingly relaxing before realising their exact nature. I love sound collage, especially when it's musical, and for me this is a fascinating way of exploring concepts. For the most part, I stand opposed to Thaemlitz's idea that music should always be considered in context and not treated as having any universal qualities, mostly because I think it's utter bollocks. I believe music can be approached from both perspectives, and its individual qualities stand up depending on how well it works from those two different sides compared with how well it was intended to. But if I'm going to listen to music that concerns real life issues, then throwing in examples of those issues as part of a sound collage that possesses musical qualities in its own right is the way I'd like to do it. When something unpleasant and truthful pops up as part of a dense tapestry of sound, it gives me the opportunity to consider it at a time when my ears are at their most receptive, and if it disturbs me, then yes, that's good, it's an appropriate reaction. I listen to music for an emotional response rather than an intellectual one, and that can include revulsion at human nature's worst sides, even if it's something as straightforward and blunt as militaristic chanting of kill, 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 followed by devastatingly sad violin music. In short, this is experimental political sound art cunningly disguised as gentle melancholic ambient. Take it whichever way you will, although it genuinely allows for a middle path that allows the meaning to complement the aesthetic, which for me is all I could ask for. Thaemlitz would quickly abandon ambient for more overtly confrontational music, and honestly I think that's a bit of a shame. Back to apolitical, spiritual butterfly music again with Escape Tank's album. Actually, with the number of self-titled albums and recurring sleeve designs, I wonder how much of the monthly series was inspired by Fax. Fax USA was an Instinct sub-label. A new name, but no new names behind it. Escape Tank is Taylor Dupree and Savas Isatis again, alongside Dietrich Sherman from Facil. Minimalism then? Yes, this is stripped back and repetitive. And with 3 tracks running between 10 and 40 minutes each, it's a bit of a daunting one. You can really hear the microsound and clicks and cuts scene that Dupree will become a big player in developing here, in what is little more than 60 minutes of quite digital drones and gentle clicking and popping beats. Escape from What throws in a few minutes of drum machine work, but this is mostly glitchy minimalism. Experimental, but with warmth in the synths. Control X's To Abort Transmission appears, to the best of my research, to be the first release by Matt Haynes, a producer with many aliases, styles and releases to his name following this. I'm not sure what happened with KK Records and Instinct Ambient Europe. Did the series simply not sell well? Were there other license issues? Either way, this was a US only release. It's also the first Instinct Ambient album not to feature sleeve design from Taylor Dupree, although it follows his layout of the previous monthly releases. The album's a mixture of crisp minimal electro and acid, some amelodic drone, and elements of dub and ethno fusion. Some of the more abstract bits are pretty aimless. How many times have we heard synth sweeps and squelches put through reverb by this point? They all sound exactly the fucking same no matter who's doing them. But when it all comes together, like on Fat Baby at Market, it's really very good. The monthly series came to an end with a new name, the Super Secret Symphony. Oh wait, it's just Abe Duke from Facil again. I think I understand this album least of all of the 10 in the series. 2 half-hour pieces, only it could easily be 7 or 8 tracks, often with seemingly disparate elements squished together slightly uncomfortably. We get spells of abstractness, a voice through a vocoder for, 4 or 5 hours by the feel of it. Some crude 303 workouts, a reverberated kick drum steadily beating for quite a few minutes, some synth plinks, a few minutes of quite pretty chords. This does genuinely feel like he's just sort of messing around and improvising noises for an hour. Occasionally it works, but mostly, well, it sounds like he's messing around and improvising noises for an hour. I suppose there's an audience for it somewhere. Once again, it wasn't licensed to KK, and Dupree wasn't responsible for the design. Actually, that isn't quite the whole story. August received 2 releases, with Ambient Intermix coming out alongside Escape Tank. A 2 CD set and a double LP selection of tracks from the series remixed by other artists from the series. We also get a gorgeous Terre Thaemlitz remix of a then unreleased track by Drum Computer. Don't worry, that's not a new name, just Escape Tank minus Omicron. There are some interesting combinations here, a dub remix of Thaemlitz, the earthly spiritualism of Adam Shaikh remixing the cold space tones of SETI. Once again though, it's a disparate collection that never fully flows. The Instinct Ambient monthly series was an impressive experiment and one that paid off. Without the several years of ambient house history behind them, the Americans were adapting to the new darker approaches of ambient surprisingly well, in contrast with the Brits, who were either returning to beats or doubling down on the chill-out clichés. The experimental and frequently dark minimalism of many of these releases would lead the way for sounds developing in both the US and Germany over coming years. Instinct also licensed a few compilations from the UK, and the difference is stark. Earthrise Entone 1 collects tracks from Entone's incredibly small catalogue, helpfully filled out by a few chilled numbers from Ninja Tune. Despite being referred to as a space-based dub trip, it's unsurprisingly mostly just trip-hop. Then there was Emmet 2000, a 2 CD set compiling Emmet 3394 and Emmet 2295. Instinct would later compile its own Emmet compilations like Emmet Explorer and Emmet Beat Exploration, bringing together tracks from the compilations and albums. Given the scarcity of the originals, these were nice options for American customers at the time, and even offer some interesting combinations of pieces for all listeners today. They also licensed 1994 material from Rising High as Rising High Futurescape, a solid run of tracks from an excellent run of releases, although the lack of Lady Burning Sky's title track is a crime. After a quiet 1994, Recycle or Die appeared in 95 with a couple of new albums, including a second by Baked Beans. Bean Me Up, Scotty, yes, the terrible puns are back, develops the trio's sound from the simplicity of their debut. Here the tribal aspects are brought more to the fore, especially in the use of more live-sounding percussion. That said, this isn't the tribal aspect of the post-industrial variety, with synth sequences percolating through the rhythms and other instruments here. The group's unique sound is absolutely present once more. Opener Jim Bean throws in repetition, and just as it's about to get skipped, a new layer comes in, reaching an intertwining series of gorgeous improvisation by the end. Human Bean is brighter, what might be a jaw harp joined by spacey arpeggios, even throwing in some post-punky guitar chords at the end. The unbearable lightness of Bean, I can't believe I even uttered those words, is the group's darkest piece yet, a menacing tribal beat and layers of feedback. The group also experiment with shorter pieces this time, such as the more conventionally structured and beautiful Soft Bean, while Heinz Roth has Bean Sad, if not actually beatless, pushes the drums right to the very back of the mix for the first time. It's not all perfect, James Bean edges awkwardly towards both new age and generic chill-out music, with some 80s Pink Floyd-esque synths in there for bad measure, while Echo Bean is a disorganised 2 minutes of no real purpose. But the longer tracks are much what one might hope for from a second album, the group not losing their own individual sound but developing it into new directions. Much as with their debut, the lengthy tracks are really addictive, sucking you into their hypnotic repetition and only letting go when the track reluctantly comes to a close. Lovely stuff indeed. Recycle or Die's second release of the year comes in the form of Fearless by Solitaire. The tribal space music duo of Elmar Schult and Steve Roach had previously released an album on Silent, but by the time of this album Roach had left and been replaced by Rudiger Gleisberg. Another musician from the same spacey, new agey, post-Berlin school world as the others, it's interesting to note that his arrival coincides with a remarkable, if brief, change in sound for the project. Having started out in slightly pompous orchestrated space music and developing into tribal ambient, Solitaire here suddenly embraced hip-hop drum loops, spoken word samples and distorted guitar solos. Opening track One Small Step is one of those check you've put the right disc in moments. Actually, the rest of the album is much more as one would expect. The drones are a bit deeper, the percussion more intense, but this is otherwise very much tribal ambient in the familiar style. The closing track features contributions from Amir Bagheri. With Bagheri, Solitaire would record a final album for Amplexus in '97, expanding on the more obviously electronic elements of this album before splitting. Other than a single appearance on a Rudiger Gleisberg album, Elmar Schult seemingly retired from recording and releasing music. He passed away in 2022. Gleisberg and Bagheri both have extensive careers in ambient music after this release. Stevie B-Zet's second and final solo album wasn't released on Recycle or Die, instead coming out on the parent label IQ, probably because it's a trance record. That said, you can hear his ambient side come through regularly throughout. It opens with an extended period of gentle pads, samples and field recordings. Indeed, there are several down-tempo tracks throughout the album that could fit comfortably on an ambient record of the era. Yes, there are a couple of vocal numbers, including Everlasting Pictures, which would probably be more at home on a Des'ree album than anything that's come within half a light year of ambient music, but honestly the ambient bits are really nice. One to try if you're brave. Stevie's good friend Sven Väth also released a second album. It actually came out in '94, but the ambient moments are too few and far between and frankly not very good for me to have actually considered talking about it. But what a difference a couple of years make. In '92, Accident in Paradise was notable for its pretty solid ambient work among the trance, while by '94 the ambient feels underdeveloped, kind of cheesy, just disappointing. Close of Ballet Dancer is pretty though. B-Zet managed a pretty decent down-tempo ambient reworking of Harlequin's Meditation for the remix album Touch Themes, his version of Ballet Dancer sadly less so, and the Alter Ego track on there is a lovely bit of ambient techno too. And just a reminder that trance was, at the time, not so far separated from what have since become considered more respectable styles. It also features remixes by Underworld and Speedy J. B-Zet and Väth would collaborate on a film soundtrack shortly afterwards, as well as a collaborative album as Astral Pilots, after which B-Zet would largely abandon his own music, other than as Schallbau, a Jazzy Breaks collaboration with Ralph Hildenbeutel, instead turning towards songwriting and production. He passed away in 2023. Sven Väth, of course, went on to achieve more success with the techno period of his career, before spending 20 years building his remarkable reputation as a DJ. His recent comeback album has received accusations of arrogance based on its cover. I'll leave that up to you to decide. And that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear your comments about the music. Please do let me know below. And there are also like, share and subscribe buttons you might like to press. And for those of you who use Spotify, check down below in the video description. There should be a link to a Spotify playlist that accompanies this series of videos. I'll be updating that with all the material I cover every time a video comes out. I'll be back very soon with the next look at 1995, starting with the releases on Apollo. I hope to see you then.